No.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Well,
Okay.
either of us could answer. Okay. We have, Duncan and I both teach, and we have a permanent training manager. And then we have a team of freelancers who regularly work with us. So a total, gosh, I don't know, about 9, I suppose.
Probably 9 or 10. Yeah.
9 or 10.
So perhaps it depends on the needs of the student.
It does partly. For instance, we've got a trainer who's a specialist in law.
Nice.
We've got a specialist in engineering. It's not always necessary to have a specialist because we have a general business background, but sometimes if somebody specifically wants certain vocabulary, then we'll get in a specialist trainer. So all our trainers have different strengths, and they all speak another language. Not necessarily perfectly, but they all speak at least one other language, so they understand the process. Because a lot of native English speakers have never actually learnt a language, so they're teaching English and they don't understand what it's like for the students. So it's terribly important. Duncan, for instance, speaks Arabic. One of our trainers speaks Turkish. I speak French and Spanish, understand a little Italian and German. And we've got 3 German speakers from the staff.
Steph speaks Australian.
But we do think it very, very important that all our staff should have been language students, not just teachers, because I think it's very easy to forget how tired people get and how much repetition you need and how frustrated you get and everything else. So they've all lived in other countries too, so they have a sensitivity towards different cultures, and those are 2 things we demand of all our trainers. They must speak another language, or at least have studied another language, and they must have lived and worked in another country. Students, learners, clients, whatever we call them, have usually four trainers, and the course is coordinated. We want them to have different voices, different accents, different personalities, but it's really important that they have a coherent course. So that's why we have a permanent training manager who coordinates and makes sure that each trainer is doing the right part of the course for each individual student. So students work in groups and one-to-one, but they only work in a group if that group is what they need. It's not a question of group in the morning, one-to-one in the afternoon, sort of fixed. So they will work with different people during the week. And if by any chance there isn't a synergy, then they get extra one-to-one. Because the important thing is they're here for a short time and they must do what they absolutely need to do. But we think group interaction is just as important as one-to-one, because if you're giving a presentation, you need an audience. If you're negotiating, it's not enough to negotiate just with your trainer. It's better if you can negotiate with other people as well. So that's why we have this kind of mixture of one-to-one and group. It takes a lot of planning. It would be much easier if we just did one-to-one. The coordinating takes a lot of effort, but we think it's a really necessary part of their training.